Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kim Coble, and I'm the Executive Director for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And on behalf of our board and staff, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to especially thank Senator Chris Van Hollen for joining us. We're going to have what I know will be both an informative and important conversation about the Americans' Job Plan, otherwise known as AGP. Our agenda today will be opening remarks from the Senator, and then Maryland LCV, along with our partners, will ask a few key questions to the Senator. And then we're going to open it up to you. We're interested in hearing what questions you have. So if you can type in the chat questions that you want to ask Senator Van Hollen, we'll do our best to get those to him during the question and answer period. The Senator will have a few closing remarks. I won't be doing my job unless we finalize this with the actions that you need to take to help advance this important piece of hopefully legislation soon. Just as background, the American Jobs Plan is President Biden's ambitious structure plan, but it's more important than that. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to not only address infrastructure, but also climate change and green jobs and justice. And specifically, the plan will allow us to be on a path for 100% renewable energy economy. It's going to create a new civilian climate corps. And it's going to promote what's known as Justice 40. This is where the plan targets 40% of the benefits of climate and clean infrastructure investments to disadvantaged communities. The AGP also will address, upgrade, and modernize America's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems with a focus on green infrastructure and nature-based systems. And one of the key pieces of data as we go into this is that 83% of Marylanders support the AGP and believe it's important that Congress takes action to address climate change through the AGP. It is with a great honor that I would like to introduce Senator Van Hollen. We've had a long-standing relationship with the senator going back to 1991 when he served in the Maryland General Assembly and helped advance some key pieces of legislation to improve environmental protections and the Chesapeake Bay. He had a nearly perfect score on Maryland LCV's scorecard. And in 2002, he was elected to represent Maryland's 8th congressional district. And then he was elected to the Senate in 2016. Senator Van Hollen continues to be a stalwart champion for the environment and currently has a 98% lifetime score on an LCV National Environmental Scorecard. He's been a defender of clean water and the Chesapeake Bay and has spearheaded several innovative climate bills, including the Climate Risk Disclosure Act, the End Polluter Welfare Act, and the U.S. Climate Act. And it's with a great honor, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you for that warm introduction. Most of all, thank you for your leadership at Maryland LCV and to your board chair, Lynn Heller, and to the entire Maryland LCV family and anybody else who's joining us for this discussion today. You mentioned that we've been working together since my time in the Maryland legislature, and I know we're joined by a number of folks from the Maryland legislature and other local officials. I just want to thank them and all of you for working in partnership to really make Maryland a national leader when it comes to tackling climate change. Of course, Maryland is not an island, it's one state. And so we at the national level really need to be working to catch up with the measures that Maryland has taken. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you to do that. Because we know that the cost of inaction when it comes to climate change is devastating. We've seen those impacts in the form of floods, in the form of droughts, in the form of firefighters. In Maryland, we've seen islands in the Chesapeake Bay disappear. We've seen flooding everywhere from Ellicott City to Annapolis. And those costs are very real. And as time goes on, we're seeing more lives lost in America and around the world, as well as, of course, escalating damage to property and to our natural environment. So for that reason alone, we would need to address this issue. But we also need to look at the opportunity side. And there are huge opportunities for the United States and the people of the United States in addressing the climate crisis. And that is why Joe Biden, President Biden, called his infrastructure modernization plan the American Jobs Plan, because we can put millions of Americans to work in homegrown jobs on the clean energy front, both in terms of helping produce renewable energy, helping make homes and office buildings more energy efficient, and doing a whole host of other things to help us tackle the climate crisis. And of course, we also need to restore American leadership, which President Biden began on his very first day in office by rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, which the United States had played a leadership role in forming in the first place, because we know we have to work with others around the world in order to address what is clearly a global crisis. And I want to thank, again, the League for everything that you're doing at home and trying to influence debate internationally to make sure that we get the job done. Now, as you said, Kim, President Biden has laid out some very clear goals. And our mandate is to develop legislation that will actually achieve those pollution reduction goals. He said he will achieve 50% reduction from 2005 levels of net greenhouse gases by the year 2030, having 100% clean power sector in electricity, in buildings, and in transportation by the year 2035. And so those are the goals. The challenge then is, okay, we need to implement the policies to get there. And that is what the American Jobs Plan is all about. And it is important that we all recognize, and I know everyone on this call recognizes, that in this 21st century, modernizing our infrastructure means making sure we have a modern electric grid, that we have modern transportation system with electric vehicles and electric charging stations to achieve the targets the scientists tell us we have to hit in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. And we can go through the different elements in the bill if there are questions, but just there are a couple of them that I wanted to highlight. One is a very big investment in retrofitting and making more efficient housing units. And this is very similar to a bill that I'd introduced already called the Hope for Homes legislation that provides rebates to homeowners to help them implement and install energy efficient changes to their homes, as well as more training for those who are installing everything from energy efficiency devices to home solar panels. There's also a major investment, as I mentioned, in charging stations. There's $174 billion to help build out our clean transportation infrastructure. And there are a number of other major items that we need to incorporate in this bill. One other important idea is what they call the Clean Energy Accelerator. Because if we look at the recent reports from the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine, in fact, one just completed this past February, you'll see that in order to achieve our goals, they estimate we need to mobilize $2 trillion in energy investments over the next 10 years, at least that amount. And so one of the proposals I've made when I was in the House and have renewed it in the Senate is to establish a green bank, a green financing authority. Senator Markey and I reintroduced that idea here in the Senate under the idea of a national climate bank. It also travels under the name of a Clean Energy Accelerator. And I was very pleased to see the Biden jobs plan include $27 billion for that purpose. I believe we need more. I believe we need to be more ambitious. And the bill Ed Markey and I introduced calls for $100 billion investment, leveraging up to $5 in private investment. And it's very targeted at energy efficiency goals and clean energy goals. And also, very importantly, requires that 40% of those investments go into disadvantaged communities, communities that too often have actually been on the losing end of pollution in the United States, most impacted. And of course, those are too often communities of color. So as part of these plans, we need to make sure that we make those important investments in disadvantaged communities. So how do we get there? And I'm going to wrap up here. My view is that whether or not you have a bipartisan infrastructure plan or not, we cannot go forward with any infrastructure modernization proposal that doesn't guarantee that we're also going to be addressing the climate piece of this. However that's structured. And there are different ways you can structure it, but the bottom line is, however it's structured, we cannot allow the climate piece to be left behind. And that has got to be a part of any ultimate legislative product that we vote on in the United States Senate, whether it's two separate bills but tied together in some way, but that is the bottom line. So I look forward, Kim, to the discussion and questions people have. And again, thank all of you for being at the forefront of this effort to make sure that we achieve the carbon pollution reduction goals that are required to save the planet and to save our state.
Thank you so much, Senator. That was an excellent introduction. And you actually answered my initial question, which was regarding negotiations in the Senate on this kind of a bill. As I said, for 83% of Marylanders, this, including climate and the infrastructure bill, is really critical. So I would say that the chances of a bipartisan, well-supported bill getting through is not very optimistic for us voters that are watching what happens in that chamber. And yet we have to include the climate aspects of it. So just real shortly, if you want to add to anything in terms of strategies that we can do to help promote and to help give you leverage to ensure that the climate aspect stays in the bill. I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, I mean, there are two pieces to this, Kim. One is that, the bipartisan bill is that's shaping up, and we don't know yet whether there'll ultimately be an agreement among, all those who are negotiating that bill. But I can say with certainty that that particular bill will not contain the kind of ambitious climate investments that are needed to achieve the goals that bring us together today. So what that means is that we have to ensure that if that bill does proceed, that there's also an agreement, all the 50 Senate Democrats, every one, that we're also going to proceed and pass a bill that picks up the difference, because the end goal has to be to adopt, at the very least, the president's American Jobs Plan, which includes, as we've been discussing, the climate piece. And so I'm a member of the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, is the chair of that committee. We're working very closely together. The committee members met last week. And you can be sure that however this is sequenced or structured, it all has to pass in the end of the day, at the end of the day, through the United States Congress, and all elements of this have to get to the president's desk. And so that the challenge we've got right now is making sure that we can come to an agreement and get the necessary assurances that we will include the climate piece at the end of the day, however this is all put together. So, but that is the strong sentiment, I can assure you, of a great majority of the Senate Democratic Caucus, including, of course, myself. And we'll just have to figure out how to get to that result.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Let me remind people that if you have questions, they go in the question and answer section there. So please type them in there, and we'll funnel them towards the end of the meeting. I'd like to introduce one of our partners, Megan Seymour with the National Wildlife Federation, ask a question about legislative viability. Megan?
Hi there. Thanks for introducing me, Kim, and it's a pleasure to be here today. It's clear that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, really, to build both Maryland and America back better, but it makes us more resilient to climate change, and makes our infrastructure greener, and will really put us on a path to 100% renewable energy. So my question was kind of similar to what Kim asked. We know that the American Jobs Plan is likely to go through reconciliation, and given that process, kind of what can we do to ensure that these pieces are included in the final bill, or, maybe do you have a sense of what are the stronger aspects that you think are likely to make it into a final version of this bill?
Well, first, thank you for your work at the National Wildlife Federation. It's a great organization. And a couple things, and I've been focusing on the American Jobs Bill to reduce carbon pollution, because that has to be our main goal. But it is also important that we address the other issue you mentioned, which is resiliency. There are major investments proposed as part of the American Jobs Plan, as well as the president's budget proposals, appropriations proposals, that help communities adapt to what they're facing right now in terms of the impact of climate change, whether it's Ellicott City or Annapolis or other parts of Maryland or the country. And so I'm glad you raised that issue as well in terms of resiliency. I should also say there's a big piece on clean water infrastructure. And of course, in Maryland and the Bay Area, we want to make sure we protect that great natural and national treasure, the Chesapeake Bay. Kim mentioned some of the work I did with the League of Conservation Voters during my time in the state legislature. And I'm pleased that even during the past 4 years of the Trump administration, when the Trump administration called for very deep cuts in federal funds for the EPA's Chesapeake Bay program, we not only prevented those cuts, but we were able to actually increase the amount of federal funding through EPA to help protect the Bay, and also passed legislation called the Wild Act, which I authored, which authorizes the Fish and Wildlife Service to do more to protect ecosystems in the Bay Area. And we're working hard now to fund those. So I did want to mention that piece of it, especially in the context of the National Wildlife Federation, and obviously the importance of protecting biodiversity around the globe. But again, in terms of the legislation, I came from a Senate Democratic caucus lunch earlier today, and we are very clear that at the end of the day, however these things are structured, if there's a bipartisan bill that goes through, that at the end of the day, it has to be linked. Its success ultimately is linked to the success of passing the entire package in the American Jobs Plan, including the climate pieces that we're focused on today.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Senator. It's with pleasure that I would like to introduce Teresa Ball. She's the Maryland Sierra Club Executive Committee member and a Charles County resident. Her question's on green jobs.
Thank you, and good evening to you, Senator, attendees and panelists. Thanks, LCV, for having me today. So yes, my question is related to the creation of green jobs, Senator Van Hollen. How do we ensure that the jobs that are created are not only green jobs, but well-paying green jobs that support families and inclusive of all Americans?
Right. So this is a key challenge, both in the area of clean energy and also other jobs throughout the country. We want to make sure that we have a country where we have living wages and people have jobs that can support themselves and their families. So look, in this area, in this bill, we have, as I said, tried to make sure that investments go into all communities, and especially be cognizant of communities that have not received the kind of investments needed in the past, and in fact have been, unfortunately, the victims of a lot of sightings of polluting plants and factories. So that's the piece in terms of investment. Now, there's also legislation, called the PRO Act, and this is legislation that's protecting the right to organize. And in my view, we do need to strengthen the hand of working men and women by strengthening the hand of labor organizations and their ability to bargain for wages and benefits. If you look at a graph over time of real wages in the United States, you see a real decline really dating back to the late 1970s. And real wages for American workers have been pretty flat for a long time. And that coincides with a number of factors, but one of those factors has been the decline in unions and union negotiating power. So that is also something that President Biden supports, the PRO Act. I would like to see that incorporated somehow into this American jobs bill. I should say, not to get too much in the weeds now, but I think by now the American public and everybody who's sort of deep into these issues is getting a crash course on Senate procedure. And what that means is that there are some things that you can pass in the Senate and avoid the filibuster. And by the way, I'm in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. All right, but until that moment, there are still some things you can do in the Senate to avoid the filibuster under what's called budget reconciliation. And that means if there's a nexus between what you're proposing and the budget, then it can pass under that 51 vote rule in the Senate. It's not subject to a filibuster. And the reason I'm going into this is I mentioned the PRO Act, for example, which provides important protections for labor unions. Now, in order to incorporate that into something like the American Jobs Plan under reconciliation, we need to get the Senate parliamentarian to agree that it's consistent, that provision is consistent with the budget reconciliation rules. Our Senate parliamentarian becomes one of the most powerful people in the country when it comes to determining whether a measure that we're proposing can be passed through that particular rule. Let me give you another one that directly relates to this, which is developing a national clean energy standard, which is something that we very much want to do, something that President Biden wants to do. We are having discussions as to whether or not you could structure that in a way that can be passed through reconciliation with 50 senators plus the vice president. Again, if in the scenario that we cannot get Senate Republicans to support some of these amendments. So that was a little bit of a detour, but it really wasn't, because it connects directly to things that are at stake here, at least how we can structure it. If you pass it through reconciliation the way you want to do it, then you have to just look for other ways where it can be. So, sorry, good question, long answer, but that's where we are.
It's great to hear the details from you, and thank you so much for spelling them out for us. I also want to mention that we are joined by, as the senator mentioned, joined by a lot of Maryland legislators, and we're trying to point you out in the chat, but we want to just thank you all for attending. So the next question is from Wandra Ashley Williams, who lives in Baltimore County. Wandra is the Maryland Regional Director of Climate Exchange, and she's also on the National Board of Directors for the NAACP. So Wandra.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you, Senator, for spending time with us this afternoon and addressing some of our concerns. Justice 40 is the idea that 40% of the funding in the American Job Plan will go to local and frontline communities affected by climate change the most. Between climate change, COVID-19, the economic crises, and racial injustice, we find ourselves in the midst of an interconnected series of epidemics with shared systemic roots. Unless those roots are addressed, crises will continue to grow in those same frontline communities. Our concern is that these Justice 40 provisions will be cut out in the name of compromise or weakened in the name of getting bipartisan support. So what are the concrete actions you as a senator serving on the Appropriations, Budget, and the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee can take in those committees to make sure that 40% of these funds will indeed be dedicated to helping those communities in need?
Well, first, thank you and the NAACP for your, decades-long fight and leadership when it comes to issues of racial equity and social justice, including when it comes to environmental justice. And I can assure you that that is front and center in our conversations, and it is front and center in President Biden's American Jobs Plan, as you say, saying that we're going to devote 40% of these investments into disadvantaged communities, which, as we've been discussing, and as you well know, have way too often been overlooked and in fact have been excessively burdened with some of the worst pollution. So it is really important that we include those provisions. And the bills that I've mentioned that I'm part of all do that. I mean, there's other legislation. There's the Thrive Act as well. And the bill that Senator Markey and I introduced to create a Clean Energy Accelerator expressly provides that 40% of the monies will be spent in the way we're talking about here. Now, if you're asking me whether that bipartisan proposal will include these kind of investments that are targeted in the way we're talking about, I haven't seen it, but I'm not sure it does. And in fact, my best guess is that it won't. This is why it's so important that we have an understanding, and more than an understanding, a commitment by a majority of senators that we're not going to stop at the bipartisan bill, that if that moves forward, whatever is not included in it that is part of President Biden's American Jobs Bill has to pass through the reconciliation process. And, as I said, in that process, as much as we would like Senate Republican support, you don't need Senate Republican support. You do need every single Democratic senator plus the vice president. So it is, the narrowest of margins. But that is why it is so important that everyone recognizes that these are steps that if there end up being two vehicles, that they're tied at the hip, they're linked at the hip essentially, and ultimately one cannot proceed and succeed without the other.
Thank you.
Thanks.
These are not issues that are for the faint of heart, are they? Our last question is from Rebecca Hammer at the National Resources Defense Council, and she's going to be asking about water and green infrastructure. Becky.
Hi, thank you, Senator. You touched on some water issues earlier, but I'd love to dig into that a bit more. Polls consistently show that water is a top concern for all Americans on all sides of the political spectrum. But federal investment in water infrastructure has fallen significantly in recent decades, and that's left our systems in a state of neglect. So my question is, will you commit to ensuring that water is a central component of any infrastructure package? And can you say a bit more about, what your top priorities are in this space, whether that's hard infrastructure like drinking water pipes and wastewater treatment plants, flood resilient nature-based infrastructure like wetlands and trees, and or aquatic ecosystems like the Chesapeake Bay watershed?
Right. Well, listen, thank you in the NRDC for all your good work for such a long period of time. And really, I think all of those are important. I mean, we've talked about the Chesapeake Bay and the importance of making sure that we clean that up, and that involves everything from cleaning up the water that comes out of the end of a pipe to cleaning up the water that's coming off of pavements and trying to reduce the impervious surfaces that cause that kind of runoff or accelerate that kind of runoff, as well as runoff from agricultural operations. And so there's that whole area of in terms of waters that pollute the water bodies like the bay, and that is why as you know, the whole rule regarding clean waters and the waters of the United States is so important, and why I'm pleased to see this administration launching an effort to reverse the damage that was done by the previous administration. As you know, this has gone through a long and winding road through the courts, but I do think it's important the administration start again. As we know, protecting wetlands, for example, is so important. They are sort of natural sponges and lung systems for water and the nutrients that are carried in the water. Clearly, we also need to work on safe drinking water and issues like lead in water, and that is a big part of the President's American Jobs Plan. And I've had numerous conversations with EPA Administrator Regan about that aspect of the plan. The Senate did pass on a bipartisan basis the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act of 2021. That was passed in April. So there are some components of it that have been bipartisan. Again, parts of it are not at the magnitude that we'd like to see, and we can build on those. But that legislation did pass out of the Environment and Public Works Committee. So I think we do have some bipartisan support for some of those provisions. And then again, what's not included, if there is a bipartisan bill, what's not included there has to be picked up in the other piece and passed with assurances. But the water infrastructure piece in all the different dimensions you talked about is really important.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Becky. So we're going to turn now to questions that are coming in through the question and answer box. And before I turn it over, I want to just publicly thank Kai Mateo, and in particular, Ben Alexandro, who's on the Maryland LCV staff. None of this happens alone, and they really have shepherded this and made it a great and enjoyable experience. And I hope for all those people that are attending that you recognize the hard work that went into pulling this off. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ben Alexandro. He's our Water Program Director for Maryland LCV, and he'll be asking the Senator questions that you guys are submitting. So keep them coming in. Ben?
Thank you so much. And we've had well over 50 questions come in so far. We won't be able to get to all of them, but let's get through what we can. So first we have Peter from Annapolis, Maryland. You're the author and the chief advocate for the new Chesapeake Wild program. And this program is perfectly situated to help restore the Bay watershed and to provide jobs while doing it. Are there efforts to get the Chesapeake Wild funding included in this American Jobs Plan?
So first of all, thank you, Ben, and other members of the team. I also want to introduce to everybody Shelby Prettyman, who is, my advisor on environment and climate change and energy issues, and she's joining us as well on this call. So Thank you for raising the Wild Act. I was very pleased that we were able to get that passed as part of a comprehensive American lands bill that was adopted in the last Congress. And it creates a $10 million authorization for the Fish and Wildlife Service. The answer is yes, I'm going to be working hard through the Appropriations Committee to provide funding to match that authorization. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and I serve on the subcommittee that funds the Department of Interior as well as EPA. And so we're hoping to get support from my colleagues to fund that. And that, those can go for very important purposes of, protecting very fragile ecosystems around the Bay, and both serve as a place for, wildlife, but also to the point we were talking about with respect to wetlands, very much also protecting water quality. So it really serves multiple purposes, and we're going to be working hard to get it done.
Well, thanks so much. And we're really looking forward to getting that bump to 15 million. That would be fantastic. The next question coming in is from Lanier in Waldorf, Maryland, asking, how will recruitment effort be administered to ensure that the process is equitable and inclusive? Are these just temporary jobs to jumpstart the economy, or can participants really rely on these opportunities for the long term? And if so, what kind of skills are needed?
So the American Jobs Plan has a number of pieces to it. It's a very big investment, over $2 trillion proposal, and we're talking about investments, from everything from repairing roads and bridges to trying to expand dramatically our transit options, and obviously the extent that we can expand transit, that reduces air pollution as well as traffic congestion. It also has a significant investment in Amtrak, for example, heavy rail, to help modernize that system. And those are things that are, in addition to the kind of infrastructure work we've been focused on today, dealing with climate change. So it's a mix of things. I mean, a lot of these investments are in areas of, again, jobs that are typically good paying jobs, often union jobs, although as I mentioned, we want to strengthen, the ability of, workers to organize, that would be put to work over some period of time. I mean, the money's in the American Jobs Bill. Unlike, back in 2008, we had the American Bill after the financial meltdown, and there was a big focus on ready jobs, right? Jobs that, you'd spend all that money within a very short period of time. The funds Jobs Bill would be invested over quite a period of time to really build up all these elements. I mean, when you're talking about changing the electricity grid, right, or building electric vehicle charging stations, we're talking about a long period of time. And so the skills really vary, across the board, from, job training in apprenticeships for, real blue collar jobs, to engineers and, people who have to design these systems. I should point out at this juncture that one of the things we're really determined to do as part of that larger reconciliation plan is include not just the parts of the American Jobs Plan that might not be included if there was a bipartisan bill, but also incorporate the provisions from President Biden's American Families Plan. We haven't talked about the American Families Plan today, but that's another very important, ambitious plan that includes everything from early education, universal early education, to increasing the federal investment in public K through 12 education, something I've been working on for a very long time, to ensuring that people can go to community college without cost, to expanding job training and apprenticeship programs to reducing the cost of four-year college. So, the question really related to both the kind of jobs, but also that obviously also means the job skills. And I think it's important here to recognize we're trying as part of that reconciliation bill to also put in the elements of the president's American Families Plan, because unfortunately, we don't have really any or very little Senate Republican support for that other major part of the president's Build Back Better initiative.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. And we're getting quite a few questions in on this general topic, but this one, I think, from Barbara from Joppa, Maryland, sums it up about a lot of folks saying how much we need dramatic shifts in our economy and the way that we live to survive climate change, but asking how do we really get beyond all these budget and deficit questions to really achieve this goal?
Well, I do think we need to have sort of a major shift in our energy consumption patterns in order to move to this sort of more clean energy economy and reduce carbon pollution in order to save our country and the planet. And that is what this discussion is all about. And that is why it is important that we meet the ambition, that the plan meets the moment. And I agree that we need to have these significant changes with respect to energy consumption, and that has to be coupled, in my view, with major investments in some of the other areas I'm talking about: early education, workforce development opportunities, the ability for families, regardless of income, to be able to afford college, whether someone wants to go for 2 years or 4 years or more. So we have to address the fundamental issues of income and wealth inequality in this country. And I do think making these kind of investments, both in education and these other areas, it can help do that. I should say I'm a big proponent and have introduced legislation called the Long-Term Unemployment Elimination Act. And the goal is to make sure that people out there who are looking for work, or trying to find a job, but who can't find one, that we do establish opportunities through subsidized jobs. And those can be public sector jobs, nonprofit sector jobs, or private sector jobs. I am very nervous that even as the economy recovers, as we beat this pandemic, that you're going to have millions of Americans who are long-term unemployed and left behind. And then millions more have left the workforce entirely. And, as they try to come back into the workforce, may find it difficult to find a job, and a good paying job. So I do want to mention that there's a little part of the president's plan that has to do with subsidized employment. It's $4 billion. In my view, it doesn't take us to the scale that we need. But I do agree with what I think was the premise of this question, which is that we have to address some of these fundamental issues of wealth and income inequality. Affordable housing is also a very big piece of that. And while there's a significant part of the president's plan that deals with increasing the supply of affordable housing, my view is we also need to increase the availability of housing, affordable housing vouchers, so that more Americans can find a safe, secure place to call home. So a lot of pieces to this, but I will say that if you take the two proposals the president's put forward together, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, it would bring about comprehensive change. And I haven't, I should mention, I know, but to this point, on July 15th, we're going to see the beginning of the implementation of the new child tax credit. This is a major piece of the American Rescue Plan that we passed a number of months ago. It will cut child poverty in half in the United States this year. But the American Rescue Plan provision only does it for a year. The American Families Plan would extend that, and I'd like to see it extended. Of course, the goal is ultimately indefinitely, but it extends it out because, you know, this will lift 82,000 Maryland children out of poverty this year. But we want to make sure we do it the year after and the year after that. So beginning July 15th, though, if you're a family with children from 6 to 17 years old, you're going to be getting $250 a month to help with childcare expenses or any other household expenses. If your child's under 6, it'll be $300 per month. That is the American Rescue Plan. That will begin on July 15th.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Senator. We have just time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. This might be the last one. From Laura from the Greenbelt Climate Action Network is asking, how can we assure that the clean energy standard portion of the American Jobs Plan does not include any false solutions such as natural gas, trash incineration, etc.?
Well, I think the way it's been proposed, including by the president, and what I support is that it does not include you know, those elements you just talked about. Natural gas is not part of the clean energy standard that I've seen proposed, nor is, you know, the incineration option. But so the way to do that would be to write it into the law as to, you know, what qualifies, you know, as under the clean energy standard. I think, you know, right now, when it comes to a federal clean energy standard, which is something I strongly support, our current challenge is trying to configure and write it in a way that passes muster with the Senate parliamentarian. Senate Republicans there are not 10 Senate Republicans who support a national clean energy standard. There just aren't. So this is the kind of provision that could only pass under a budget reconciliation process. And then the question becomes, does this qualify under the rules, under the budget reconciliation rules, as something that can be passed under that umbrella?
Maybe one more quick question, Ben?
Sure, we'll do one more. Outdoor recreation is an economic driver for our region. And Reed from Annapolis wants to know, is there an opportunity for the American Jobs Plan or the infrastructure plan to include investments in infrastructure to support outdoor recreation? For example, public access points, park features, trails, increasing funding for programs like the Chesapeake Gateways program, etc.
So yes, I mean, if you look at the transportation part of this plan, it does include, you know, not just multimodal in the sense of, you know, roads, trains, transit, but it also includes things like, you know, bikeways, trails, pedestrian access. So that is very much, you know, part of what is envisioned under the proposals that are making their way now through the House and Senate. And on some of those issues, we've gotten, you know, we've had some bipartisan support. Sometimes it's a battle, but you know, we've been able to over time include more of that in our current infrastructure plans. But I do think that's an area that we can expand because, you know, what we want, of course, is livable communities, and that means, you know, being able to, you know, bike, you know, get to and from in those kind of ways, as well as the traditional ways. And in fact, you know, and transit. I do think transit. We want to increase transit options. You know, I'll give you one Maryland example. There's something called the, you know, Southern Maryland Regional Rapid Transit project. It was just, you know, it did not get support, you know, from the governor but the legislature took action, and we are working to try to find a way to provide more federal funds for that. That would create a transit link between Prince George's County and Charles County, which is a very congested corridor. And this would both reduce congestion and obviously also deal with air pollution and the carbon footprint and all sorts of other things. So, so that's the transit's another piece of this, as are hiker-biker trails and other options.
Thank you very much, Senator. And Ben, thank you for facilitating those great questions. I know we could go on and on with that. So, Senator, a few closing comments before we wrap it up.
Well, thank you, you know, again, to the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and to you, Kim, and everybody who's organizing this and everybody joining it. I do want to give, as we have already, but I want to emphasize again, thank you to our state and local leaders. In Annapolis, you know, really, the legislature has been, you know, pushing the state forward. And as I said at the beginning, we need for the country to catch up and really adopt this ambitious plan. And it will involve, you know, people from around the country pushing to make this happen. You know, at the end of the day, we need the votes. You know, that's the bottom line. We need the votes. You know, I was disappointed today. We don't have to get into it. I was disappointed that, well, it hasn't happened, but it's expected that Mitch McConnell will block consideration of a bill on the For the People Act to address efforts around the country to put up barriers to voting. So we're going to have to find a way to deal with that and address that going forward. And we're going to keep pushing for that bill. But my larger point here is, and I know, is voter engagement and, you know, public involvement is so important to making sure that we can meet the moment. And I know the public's there. I know the people of Maryland are there. You cited, Kim, some polling on these issues. So we just need to make sure that your chapters around the country are equally successful at engaging, you know, people in every of our 50 states.
Well, thank you, Senator. And I will tell you on behalf of the League of Conservation Voters, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, we are working very, very hard on this. So I will carry your message to my colleagues across the country. And I do want to offer you a really sincere thank you for your time today, for your knowledge, for sharing it. I don't know how to summarize it except to just say that you make us really proud and to have you represent us. So thank you for that.
I also partner with you.
It is a great partnership. And I also want to thank all the participants for joining and being part of this really important, really timely conversation about the American Job Plan. There is, as Senator Van Hollen emphasized, there is action you can take. And you need to take this. And instead of going through all the details right now, go to our website, mdlcv.org. And we have a number of actions for you to take. And there's background information that if you need that. Of one of the things that you can do that's very simple is we give you instructions on recording a video about why this is important. And we're going to compile these. Send this along with some other materials to Senator Van Hollen so he can use that. So your voice matters. It really matters in this case. So please go to our website, look at the actions you can take, follow up with any questions you have, and we're happy to help you. And I wish everybody a great evening. And Senator Van Hollen, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right.